In our last video we finished up with Pine Grove Park, but if we look in the distance here, we'll see a real nice view and basically condos today. But when I was growing up, that wasn't the view at all. And as you look down from Pine Grove Park, all you could see were these big oil tanks. This aerial view gives a pretty good idea of where they're located. And you can see the large tanks there, and then over to the left of that you see some smaller tanks. And the other thing that was quite noticeable in that area was Peerless Cement Company. When I was a boy, I remember the big tanks mainly belonged to Shell Oil Company, but Standard Oil had some too, as you can see from this picture taken at the foot of Thomas Street of Standard Oil. That's me in front of the old Standard buggy. From this aerial view, you can see how large a complex Peerless Cement was. And this is the view from the bridge. Peerless was located right about where the Edison Inn used to be. It wasn't at all unusual to see ships docked up alongside Peerless with their self-unloaders, unloading the necessary ingredients to make the cement. This also gives you a pretty good view of these oil tanks that we've been talking about. And if you notice in the foreground there are these big sand piles. We used to go down there a lot. We used to call it the Gertie. I don't know why, but we'd swim down there and play in the sand. Here's a picture of my mother just laying in the sand, getting some sun, I think. And in the midst of all this manufacturing at Peerless sits this little Edison depot. Pretty much forgotten about historically. Just a place to store stuff or use as a yard office, as you can see from this picture here. And although it wasn't unusual to see a ship docked alongside Peerless, it was unusual to see one sinking alongside Peerless. On June 1st, 1967, at about 10 o'clock at night, the Canadian freighter Renvoil struck the Sylvania as it unloaded cement stone at Peerless. The Renvoil had just left the Sarnia dock heading north, and of course she wanted to go south. So she decided she'd go just beyond the bridge and try to make a 180-degree turn. Well, the current caught her and the rudder didn't respond, and so she almost went broadside down into St. Clair River and hit the Sylvania on the starboard side. She sank onto a 27-foot ledge that protruded out from the dock. Fortunately, the mooring cables held, otherwise the ship would have sunk into deeper water. The Renvoil only had some bow damage, so she was able to get underway again without any problem. It cost over $1 million to refloat the Sylvania, and it cost only $20,000 to fix the Renvoil. The Sylvania wasn't always a self-unloader. Originally, it looked like this when it was built. It was 47 feet shorter, and of course you can see the wheelhouse looks a little different as well. She was just a normal freight hauler. In this picture here, you can see a brand new load of Dodges going up St. Clair River. And in the background, you can see that smokestack from the waterworks. The Sylvania was no stranger to collisions. She was built in March of 1905 and had her first collision in June of 1905. And she had 3 more collisions before her collision at Peerless. In this picture here, she is being repaired after her first collision. Doesn't look too bad from this side, but from the other side here, you can see it was pretty extensive. The Sylvania made her last trip in 1980, and she was scrapped in 1983. The Sylvania wasn't the only collision off of Peerless Cement. In June of 1972, heading upbound, the Sydney Smith lost control turning sideways in the strong currents near the head of the St. Clair River. She was struck by the southbound freighter Parker Evans. The collision occurred in the rapids. It's not normally referred to the rapids anymore. It's the area right below the Blue Water Bridge where the Lake Huron comes into St. Clair River. But in the old days it was referred to as the rapids, as you can see from this postcard. Of course, this picture is before the bridge. It's a very difficult spot to navigate for two reasons. One is because of the depths of the water. They try to keep right there within the channel, which is that darker spot going down the center. And if you have two ships passing each other on the ship, which they used to be able to do, it's even more difficult because they have to stay right in the center. And then they have to contend with the strong current coming off the Lake Huron. The second reason is that they're already coming off a turn, as you can see from this picture here, and they're trying to straighten out. And they know they have to stay as close to the Canadian shore as possible if they're going upstream. It's even more difficult to navigate it at night, which is when this collision occurred. The Sydney Smith was going toward the bridge and felt that it was getting too close to the Canadian shore, so they overcompensated by going toward the U.S. side. And the current caught the bow, and the ship did not have enough power to overcome the current, so it started to go sideways in the river, and it went right in front of the Parker Evans. It hit so hard that the Parker Evans rebounded off of her and hit her again, both doing tremendous damage, and it started to sink, although it did get within 6 feet of Peerless Mint docks. They were ready to throw out the mooring lines, but there was nobody on the dock to catch them because it was so late. The Sydney Smith sank in about 40 feet of water, but since she had a beam of 52 feet, part of her stuck up above the water. The Parker Evans had damage to the bow, but it wasn't serious enough to cause any problem. She went on her way. You can see her tied up there to the Peerless down by the sand piles. Because of the obstruction in the shipping channel, the Coast Guard made it a one-way channel. They pretty much directed traffic when they could go and how many could go at a time. The good thing to come out of all this is that from that point on, no two ships were allowed to go underneath the Blue Water Bridge at the same time. Only one is allowed to go under there, and the other one has to wait. I thought you might be interested in seeing this home movie that was taken by the David Shannon Boyd family. Here you see the Parker Evans tied up here, waiting for approval from the Coast Guard to get on its way. And there you can see the Sydney Smith laying over there on her side. When the collision occurred, Captain Robert Campbell was on duty that night as captain of the CN ferry between Port Huron and Sarnia. The 43-year-old was walking toward the crew hut of Purdy's Fishery in Point Edward, where the pilot boat was anchored, when he heard distress signals from the ship's whistle, and a crash that sounded like a couple of boxcars coming together, he said at the time. He yelled for his deckhand, Bill Chadwick, who was only 19 years old at Point Edward, and got the pilot boat moving. Crossing the swift current near the Blue Water Bridge, Campbell steadied the boat against the left stern of the sinking Smith, allowing the 31 crewmen to scramble aboard. Within minutes, the freighter was at the bottom of St. Clair River. Only her keel was visible. They tried to refloat her, but they couldn't possibly do it because the ship had broken in two, so they did finally salvage her and got it out of the way of the traffic. The salvaged hull was now used as a shore barrier in Sarnia. There's actually a dock in Sarnia called the Sydney Smith Dock. She was a self-unloader similar to what the Sylvania was, and her boom now sits below the water. This is what it looks like today. It gives the divers something to look at. In 1973, the city acquired the Peerless property in a land swap with Grand Trunk. The factory was torn down, and eventually the Edison Inn went in at that location. But through it all, Grand Trunk Railroad Station, or as some people call it, the Edison Station, survived and became what it is today. It probably didn't look this good when Edison was taking the train from here. On February 10, 1940, there was another event at the Peerless location that had Port Huron pretty excited. And that was the premiere opening of Young Tom Edison. People couldn't believe they were going to see Mickey Rooney, the #1 actor in America, and he was coming to Port Huron. That's why they were all crowded around the train down at Peerless, is where the train ended up at. Because this is where Tom worked out of when he was an employee for Grand Trunk Railroad. Thanks to the cooperation of Henry Ford, the Sam Hill engine, a wood-burning engine from the time of Edison's youthful career as a candy seller on the Grand Trunk Railroad, brought Mickey Rooney and other distinguished guests along the same route that Thomas Edison rode in his time. And on that train trip to Port Huron, Mickey Rooney reenacted his role as young Tom Edison on the train selling his wares to Mrs. Edison. All right, let's look at the downtown scene now. This is the Desmond Theater, later the Huron Theater, and this is where the premiere was held. This is a replica of the permanent memorial to be erected to Thomas Alva Edison near his boyhood home in Port Huron, Michigan. Well, I don't know whatever happened to that permanent memorial, but I've never seen it. Maybe the boulder in Pine Grove Park took its place. This is the real young Tom Edison. But who is this fellow Mickey Rooney? For those not old enough to know, here's a couple of scenes from his trailer for the movie.
Candy, fruits, peanuts. Here. Thank you, ma'am. Sir? Paper, sir?
Gosh, you're smart.
No, I'm not. I wish I was.
You're smart enough for me. You know lots and lots of things.
Not half as many things as I'd like to. There's so many things that I don't know, Tanny, that it scares me. Look at that grass. What makes it green? Why isn't it yellow, purple, or black?
That boy's a real problem, Nancy.
Every time you wake up with a cramp, Sam Edison, you take it out on Tom.
I haven't got a cramp, and you pamper him too much.
Well, he's a little different from the other boys.
That's what I'm worried about. He's got that Yankee trait of tinkering with useless things.
Oh, Genevieve, sweet Genevieve, the days may come, the days may go, but still the hands of memory weave the blissful dreams of long ago.
You see that? That's hydrochloric acid. And this is concentrated ammonia. Now we mix the two of them together.
Then what'll happen?
I don't know. That's what I'm going to find out.
Hey, schools are burning! Schools are
You're not going to be afraid of what anybody says. Not tomorrow or any other day. Port Huron isn't the whole world, Tom. There's a much bigger world beyond here. And someday you're going to be part of it. An important part of it.
Tom Edison, the most famous Grand Trunk employee ever. In our next video, we'll stay in this area and then we'll work our way north.